Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Hey, everybody, it's time for another edition of Live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James here in Chicago, bringing you number 153 of Heartland at Home during the time of the pandemic. Still with us, even though they've changed the classification and what they call it. This show is for the week of May 20th, and we are recording it on Wednesday, May 17th. Our guests today are going to be Gordon Mantler, talking about building multiracial coalitions. He's got a book out, a number of books out. And we have the one and only Maurice, Mobetta Brown, trumpeter, hell of a jazz musician, et cetera, et cetera. And he's going to join us and play us a little bit of music. I want to bring up that last week we had Maria Haddon, the alderwoman of the 49th Ward, on talking about asylum seekers. And you can go to youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos, and you can just see that segment, or you can see last week's whole show. But one of the things I wanted to share, a follow-up on immigrants or migrant seekers or migrants or asylum seekers coming to Chicago, is what happens once they get here. And it's a challenge. There's a lot of challenges as well as a lot of opportunity. But one good thing I learned today, it came to me via Block Club, which is a great thing to get on your computer, and it's for Morgan Park. It says Venezuelan refugees living in Southside Police Station find peace by volunteering at community garden nearby. And Far Southside neighbors opened the community garden so migrants at the nearby police station had a place to unwind. And then some people began to pitch in. So that's a whole story, and you can find it on Block Club. On elections, it was an election Tuesday around the United States, and a conservative Black Republican named Cameron, who has close ties not only to Mitch McConnell, but also to Donald Trump, he won the Republican primary to be the candidate in Kentucky for governor. Now, he's going to go up against a guy who I've been watching and really like, even though I don't know that much about him, and he's not that much in the news, but that would be Governor Andy Beshear, a Democrat. And Beshear probably he's pretty popular and has a pretty good chance of retaining the governorship of Kentucky. Also in Pennsylvania, the Democrats made some gains in suburban areas. They kept the majority in Pennsylvania. There's a new mayor coming in to be the mayor of Philadelphia. Elections are everywhere. And of course, we had one here in Chicago. Brandon Johnson, our new mayor, was inaugurated on Monday, the 15th. And I got to say that the one and only Katie Hogan, who sometimes comes on, shares hosting or producing duties here, she was there. And I've got her just before she's running off to work. And she agreed to tell us a little about what it was like at the inauguration. So good morning to you, Katie Hogan.
Good morning, Michael James. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. So this was my third mayoral inauguration in my life. The other two were, of course, Harold Washington's, which were each different, as was this. This one was at what used to be the pavilion at U of I campus. The crowd was big, varied, multiracial, multi-age, lots of young people, more young people, I think, than I've seen at a big citywide political event like of this nature. That's exciting. And it was energetic. So the inauguration includes the swearing in of the city,
The alder people.
the city offices of city clerk, treasurer, and the alder people, like you said. So there was an interesting array of responses to aldermen across the crowd. There are some people who had huge hands, applause. One of those was Carlos
Ramirez Rosa.
Exactly. He got a lot of applause. He's a spokesperson for the group. I mean, look at the source of this mayor. The source of this mayor is union, teaching, Cook County government. So a lot of the people I was looking over just before I came onto this, the chosen officers of his, of his administration thus far, CFO Jill Jaworski. I had no idea of this person, and she is out of county, historically county, and also a financial background. Rich Guidas, I don't know if that's the right way to say his name. Guidice. He's the chief of staff. He's got quite a history in City Hall. It's not a bad idea to have someone who knows the hallways to be in charge of those ropes. He's got a couple people who come out of their association with Pritzker, which was interesting. The head of his transition team now is Jessica Angus. I think you interviewed Amisha Patel.
Yeah, I did. I interviewed Amisha Patel.
And so his administration is going to be, I think, way more grassroots than we've ever had actually in our lifetimes, which is terribly exciting. And probably really focused. Couple things that I saw in Cranes today. There will be backlash for him up front. Right now, it's a little bit of a love fest. Everybody's wishing him well, yada, 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 hoping he gets good people around him. That's like the main cry, which is sort of veiled racism in my mind. It's like, oh, I hope he gets good people so that, he could do the job. Okay, we got that. So anyway, I think one of the things that came through on Monday at the inauguration, he's the son of a preacher man, and he likes the preacher mode. When Karen Clark Sheard, an incredible voice, sang one hymn that is not listed on the program, and I wish I knew the title of it, the crowd kind of went wild as she built in true gospel fashion to the emotional up, people were standing up, raising their hands and being very churchy, for those of us who know. I did see our friend Michael Flager there, who is also in good stead with the new young mayor. And I think we're just going to meet a whole lot of new people through his administration that we've never heard of before. The old guard is definitely out, I believe. So it's amazing. I mean, even Harold didn't do that. Harold had to play with some of the players because it was not the era that we're in now, whereby this election was won by a coalition of grassroots forces, union people, and young radicals, basically. So that's it's going to be a great time to be in Chicago, I think, as well as touchy. That's what I have to say.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Kate, and it's always great. And you worked hard to help elect Brandon Johnson. I think a lot of people in the city are really glad that Brandon Johnson is our new mayor. And I'm optimistic always, but when we have a good person in office, we have to back them up in the communities. So keep organizing out there, everybody. And we'll bring you more information as we have it. And Katie, you have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Michael. Have a great show.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
And we're going to keep going with a little bit more information. There will be a celebration for our Alderwoman Maria Haddon here in the 49th Ward on Sunday afternoon at a restaurant in the 6900 block of North Clark on the tragedy front. The American Friends Service Committee reported last week Israel conducted extensive airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. In only 5 days, 33 Palestinians were killed, among them 6 children. At least 147 civilians were injured, including 48 children and 10 elders. More than 1,000 households were damaged. This is on top of the deep, long-term damage caused by the blockade on Gaza, which has already created a humanitarian emergency. On the sports front, all I could say is the Sox won on Tuesday and the Lakers lost to Denver on Tuesday. I'm going to go to the post office now. I love going to the post office, getting new stamps. I found out you can get a lot of them online these days. I used to order old stamps that I would use when I would mail out copies of my new books. And I read this week that Chief Standing Bear, whose 1879 lawsuit and celebrated I Am a Man courtroom speech led to the recognition of Native American legal rights, he was honored this past Friday with a forever stamp featuring his portrait. The leader of a small Ponca tribe in northeastern Nebraska, Standing Bear successfully fought in court for Native Americans to be considered persons in the United States with the same rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as other Americans, and not as wards of the government. So the new stamp is out, and one reason this caught my attention, beside it being a beautiful stamp, is that the Ponca tribe is also the tribe of Native American saxophone, the late great Native American saxophone player Jim Pepper. And he has a Ponca song, which I think we're going to try to play a riff of before we go on with the show. Somewhere in there it'll be. So with that said, I'm going to say, let's get on with the rest of the show. And our next guest will be a fellow named Gordon Mantler, who I met when he came out with his first book about the Poor People Campaign in 1968. And he has a new book out on Multiracial Promise. So we're going to take a musical break and we'll be right back with our first guest. And don't go too far away from the left end of your dial, because our second guest is the one and only Maurice Mobetta Brown. And he's in Chicago for a concert on Thursday night up in Evanston at Space. And he's always a wonderful person to talk to. He makes great music. So we'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland.
I will fall for nothing. Time to stop the front. Yeah, we stand for something. Never fall for nothing. That's all we want. Stop rock and roll. Everybody lose control. Everything I did it since I'm 4 years old. The air letting the sea, they get into your soul. And I'm like a space rocket just waiting to explode. Homeless beings on this planet begging and getting cash. But I'm seeing what they seeing. They know it never lasts. Getting high off your supply. They say they getting low. You ain't hearing what they saying. Send them to the stove. My brothers befriended them. Cops, they ain't standing them. Black folks prep for the police, but now they scared to come. Choke my man's dead in the street, face on the pavement. Killing the shit and they get away with it. Right now I fear they only see me one way. And I know you counting sins, feeling some type of way. But you cussing shit on me and then you hope that I stay. But I wonder what they say when I come back and play. Be like,
Hey, we're back with more Live from the Heartland. And it gives me great pleasure to bring someone on who I had on the show many years ago when he wrote his first book back when we were doing the show up at the Heartland Cafe. He's a guy who has taken a lot of interest in Chicago politics, even though he's not living here. And, I once upon a time discovered on the ground a piece of paper from Students for Democratic Society said, build the interracial movement of the poor. And Gordon K. Mantler, the Associate Professor of Writing and History and the university's writing program at George Washington University, has done a couple of books that really talk about building interracial movements. And most recently, I got a nice copy of the Multiracial Promise, which is about the Harold Washington campaign back in 1983 and beyond. So we're going to talk about that stuff. And I thought it was appropriate to do it because here in Chicago, we have a new mayor as of Monday, and that would be Brandon Johnson. And in your book, you do talk about the hopes with Harold Washington, and then we lost some elections after that, and we had a long reign of More Daley. And then we had Rahm Emanuel. Then we got Lori Lightfoot, where there was a lot of hope, but you say in your book that she really didn't move in a progressive direction. So with all that running my mouth, how about hello to you, and tell us a little bit about your interest in multiracial, multi-ethnic coalitions and how these books came to be. You've got a couple of them.
Yes, you're right. It's great to be on the show. It's great to see you again, Michael. It has been, I think it's been 10 years, right? Something
it's been too long.
It has been. Yeah, the first book, Power of the Poor, came out 10 years ago, actually this spring, 2013, and then Multiracial Promise in 2023. And you've picked up on the theme that I'm particularly interested in, which is coalition building, multiracial coalition building. And I think that oftentimes what historians talk about the 1960s and the 1970s and about African-American activism and the civil rights movement or the Black freedom struggle or these other social movements in kind of their silos, right? Whether it's anti-war, the student movement, or second wave feminism. And I was always, it never made a lot of sense to me to think of them that way, because they all intermingle, and folks are not part of one movement, but multiple movements and with different identities. And so the first book was about the Poor People's Campaign of '68 that Dr. King was working on, as you know, and it's actually how I got interested in the Harold Washington campaign. To understand the Poor People's Campaign of '68, you really have to think about Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's foray into Chicago a few years earlier in the '66 Freedom Movement, Chicago Freedom Movement. Al Raby was part of a small group of folks that invited Dr. King to come to Chicago and lead that movement, build on the work that had been already happening in the city and schools and trying to desegregate housing, et cetera, and fight police brutality for several years. So Dr. King comes in the mid-'60s and then uses that lessons from that movement to then apply it to the Poor People's Campaign, which of course he doesn't end up witnessing because he's assassinated in Memphis in April of '68.
Let me just throw in here that I remember that summer of '66 when King came, and I remember going with Rennie Davis out to the West Side and having a meeting with some of the SCLC people. I was working with a group called Joint Community Union, which came out of SDS, and we were organizing rent strikes, welfare union stuff, a lot of activity in Uptown. And I remember being at that apartment where King came through and just kind of said hello to us all. Mm-hmm. I also did meet King a few years later when I gave a speech at the Coliseum, an anti-war speech. Mm-hmm. But we were starting to build a coalition then. We called it a little bit later the Young Patriots, which came out of the Goodfellows, which came out of Join. They talked about the Rainbow Coalition, and later Jesse Jackson adopted it. But we were working with the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, with the Latin American Defense Organization, with Join. So that multiracial thing was in vogue and people were attempting to do it. And it's what had always inspired me, thinking about, I wrote a paper in college that talked about wearing a yarmulke with a kimono with Dutch shoes, eating Chinese food while listening to John Lee Hooker play the blues. So your work is right up my alley. So let's talk a little bit more about how you developed an interest in multiracial coalition building and your ties to Chicago.
Yeah. No, that's great. And all this organizing is happening. And the first book, I really try to capture a good bit of what's going on the ground in Chicago. And then I touch on it in the second book as well. But Raby ends up being this. He's the one that kind of connects me to the Harold Washington moment. Al Raby, because he ends up reemerging, resurfacing as the campaign manager for Harold, his second campaign manager in January of '83. And in the midst of that campaign, he writes a short essay where he talks about the Harold Washington campaign as the continuation and the culmination of the Poor People's Campaign of '68, 15 years earlier. So he connects it himself. And this is a document that's in the Harold Washington Library downtown. And it got my attention right away. And I was like, that's really interesting. That's an interesting legacy of the campaign that I hadn't thought about. And I ended up going down the road to learn more about Harold, who I remember as a kid. I was 11 when he was elected the first time, but I remember it being national news and worthwhile being on the 6:30 news or whatever. I didn't grow up in Chicago, as you said. I have instead I was living with my grandfather and my parents. My grandfather was a small town Midwesterner, moved to Chicago in the late 20s. Met my grandmother there, and got married, had my aunt, eventually moved east in the 40s, but he lived with us when I was growing up, and he talked about Chicago all the time. It was the gritty industrial Chicago of the 30s. It captured his imagination. And it was clearly a formative moment for him, and he talked about it a lot as I was a teenager. He was in his 80s by that time, and it was another kind of seed where I thought, I want to know more about that city. And I grew up outside of Baltimore, so maybe some parallels between the two cities. Obviously, very different in size, but in terms of being industrial cities of importance and kind of rich culturally, I found Chicago to be a place I really wanted to spend more time in, and so I did it for both books. But to talk about Harold for a moment here, there's been a lot written about him and a lot written about that movement, but I really thought that most of it has been written by folks who were part of the administration or journalists that were part of it. And I really thought that he deserved a good academic look that really centered this campaign into the social movements, the 20 years at least of organizing and activism that was going on before he was elected in '83. And so in a sense, I don't want to overstate this, but in a sense, he's a little bit decentered in this story because I really try to spend as much time with all the folks that make this possible, whether it's Lou Palmer or Helen Schiller or Rudy Lozano and Chuy Garcia, all these folks who I think if you know Chicago politics and history, maybe you know these names. I think a lot of folks don't know these names anymore because it's a generation or two back, but really trying to bring these folks back into the focus that made it possible for Harold to win. He was obviously an incredibly gifted and charismatic politician, a coalition builder in and of himself. But any campaign requires many people. It's not just the individual. And I think that there are moments where we can wander too far into great man theory and talk all about Harold and not about all the folks that made it happen. And so, and that's really what I guess I'm most interested in academically in my scholarship, in part because I feel like that's how we need to understand politics today. It's not about waiting for a hero on horseback to come and save the city or save the nation or the world, but that we have to work together, find common ground, even if we have a lot of other things that we don't agree upon, and find that common ground and work toward a better, more equitable, more open, in this case, a more equitable and open Chicago, which is what Harold was pushing for.
One of the things that we always have talked about is the importance of the movement in the community. if you elect someone like a Harold or a Jimmy Carter or whoever, and you have hope in them, it's the election is only part of it, and you address it. You really talk about a distinction between campaigning and governing. And you also talk about the importance of groups in the community to back up whoever we have elected and to kind of push through programs. We've always said that we got to, okay, we got so-and-so in now, we got to really, push them and we got to support them. Your thoughts on that? You really do talk about a distinction between the campaign and the actual governing and what it takes to make progress if and when we can do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is a central argument of the book, because I think that would be another point I would say, is that much of the treatment of Harold's campaign was that it climaxes with the campaign, and then there's less discussion about how hard governing it is. As difficult as it was to win in February and April of '83 against virulent racism and a machine that was determined not to let a Black man become mayor, even to the point of supporting a Republican, that as hard as that was and as exhausting as that was, the real work started when he took the oath of office. And we see that, and you'll probably ask this question, but I'll jump ahead here, is that this is what we're seeing this week, right? Brandon Johnson takes the oath and says, here, the real work is now. How do we actually put in to place, translate those campaign promises into real policy that makes a difference for people? And I think it's natural, right, after the campaign is over, to take a breath, to take a deep breath. Maybe many folks who are not as engaged in politics will then go back to their, kind of their normal routines, their jobs, their families, and are not as engaged with what's going on in the business of governance. But it's actually, that is when they, have to stay focused and keep their allies, both have their back. I think the way I put it, I've been putting it recently with thinking about Brandon, is that have their back, and help defend them, protect them somewhat from the knives that will come out from the right wing and the critics, but also keep them, keep elected officials responsible or accountable, to what they said they were going to do. And I think that what we see in the 80s is that when that happened, when, for instance, the Latinos that were part of the coalition that helped make the difference in '83, don't think Harold and the administration's moving quickly enough to establish a Mayor's Advisory Commission for Latino Affairs, they push him, and say, we're going to hold a press conference tomorrow. Are you on board, or are we just going to do this and go rogue and do this on our own? And Harold and his aides respond and say, no, we're gonna go ahead and do this. And one of the great legacies, I think, of the Washington administration is the empowerment of Latinos politically in the city. I mean, he champions Latino majority city council districts, 4 of them, which of course make the difference and give him a council majority in 1986. He does the same thing for a Latino majority congressional district in the 90s, that Luis Gutierrez, ends up becoming the first holder of. And, so that's a good example of where activists were putting the pressure on and him responding, right? But there's other things. The police department continues to be really dysfunctional, right? The Chicago Housing Authority continues to be dysfunctional, even though symbolically it was important to have Fred Rice and Renault Robinson as the first Black leaders of those 2 organizations. It's more symbolism, and it doesn't really make a huge difference in terms of the day-to-day operations of those 2 agencies, who are incredibly important to the daily lives of many working-class Chicagoans. And so, it's sometimes it's difficult to, how much do you want to criticize the first Black mayor who you really like and you trust? you don't want to give ammunition to his opponents. But at the same time, if you don't keep the pressure on, maybe behind the scenes, you keep that pressure on to make sure that, yes, he takes the housing authority seriously. Yes, he actually does try to push Fred Rice, who was a career Chicago cop, to start changing the culture of the department, right? So.
Yeah, he was the superintendent of police for a while.
Right.
Gordon Mantler, in your book, The Multiracial Promise, Harold Washington's Chicago and the Democratic Struggle in Reagan's America. You really do talk about how Reagan was prominent then. The Republicans were all about tightening things up and spending less on social programs. You claim and you maintain that the Harold Washington victory was kind of a blueprint in a way for Democrats coming back to the ascendancy and moving back into power in some, even though today it's split, we do have control of a lot of cities. Even Jacksonville, which was Republican, just this Tuesday voted in a Democratic mayor. Mm-hmm. Jacksonville was the largest Republican-run city or Republican mayor in the country, I think. That's right. And so that's a change. So give us a little bit about where Reagan was at, and then how Harold might have influenced that, and kind of some pathways going forward. Because this idea of the Rainbow Coalition or multi-ethnic, ethnic coalitions, it's happening around the country as the country changes, as immigration changes, as the percentage of white people diminishes to the whole. We see at a time when in the old days, when as blacks started to become elected to office and in big cities became prominent in government, all of a sudden we see the Republicans wanting less government. Yep. Yep. It's like, I won't go off on that, but anything you want to say after I ran my mouth there?
No, I would, totally agree. I mean, I do. One of the reasons why the cover of the book is blue is because this is also a debate about what the Democratic Party of the future is going to look like.
I love this color.
So thank you.
I like the book. I got to use some cheaters to read it. It is an academic book. It is.
Oh, it is.
Full of information.
I have to bring my readers out as well. Actually, my eyes are not as good anymore. But no. This really is a debate about what the party is going to look like in the 1980s, and onward. Right. It's clear that the Republican Party of old, that may have had a lot more progressives in it, folks that you would have thought who would look like Democrats today, the George Romneys and people like that, perhaps, are on their way out, right? Charles Percy is a little bit in that mold, right? The senator in Illinois, but Reaganism has kind of taken over the Republican Party in the 80s. And of course, he's a good foil for Harold, both as a congressman, as a freshman congressman, and then as mayor. It's clear that Harold is fighting not just white supremacy at home, but nationally, but as well as the administration, who is trying to reduce urban funding and just doesn't want to commit as much government investment in cities, often, as you say, because they're majority African American and Latino, and that those cities are now being controlled increasingly.
And Asians these days, too.
Right. Yeah. Today, for sure. But increasingly majority controlled politically with different policy goals, right? That often are much more progressive and much more in tune with trying to help working class folks just get a leg up, right? Be able to be part of the business of the city. And so, to me, this is, you mentioned Jesse Jackson earlier in the Rainbow Coalition. I mean, he sees what Harold is able to do in the spring of '83 in Chicago, a place where many people never thought an African-American would win the mayoralty because of the power of the machine and the way that white supremacy plays out. And Jesse sees Harold's success and says, I can do that on the national level. And while he doesn't win the nomination, he certainly does change the conversation, both in 84 and in 88. And you start seeing, and is a viable candidate in many states, right? He wins state primaries and caucuses in both presidential years. And so we fast forward to today. Again, it is this multiracial coalition, Black, brown, white, Asian, as you said, that really seems to be, that's how Joe Biden wins. That's how Barack Obama wins. I mean,
yeah, and Native Americans in Arizona, too.
Yep.
They helped to shift that vote.
Yeah.
Hey,
So,
Gordon, we're going to run out of time here. But how about you give us a little bit of a parting shot, your view on what you think Democrats, progressives should be working on now?
Wow. Okay. A nice small question for
just a little hint.
Wrap up things here. I mean, God, a living wage, and just actually, you know what? One of the things that we haven't talked about here is why voter turnout continues to be so low in municipal elections, right? Including in the Chicago election, getting folks re-engaged with local elections. And how that happens is that government actually has to start fulfilling some of the promises that they made, right? So folks, a new generation just doesn't think that it doesn't matter who we put into office, they won't do what they said they were going to do. So getting police departments under control, and making the city more affordable, housing-wise, education-wise, healthcare-wise. Yeah.
So the key is really organizing. As we used to say, and Joe Hill said it best, don't mourn, organize. We really have to build, organizations that are acting in the interest of the people.
Yep.
Your book has a lot of history and a lot of information, and I really have enjoyed the parts I've read. And I did look through, a bunch of it, read the introduction, and I like it. And I do love the color. Gordon Mantler, you're a hell of a guy. The Multiracial Promise, North Carolina University Press. It's all about Harold Washington and community groups. There's a few things that I will tell you on the side you might want to add or include when it gets reprinted. And I want to thank you for coming on, and you keep doing good in the world.
Okay. You too. Thank you, Michael.
Okay. We'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland. Don't go anywhere.
Right time for me to say what's on my mind. In the daytime, it be hard to find, 'cause I'm always on the grind. But the nighttime, it's the right time for me to say what's on my mind. In the daytime, it be hard to find, 'cause I'm always on the grind, the grind. What's on my mind. In the daytime, it be hard to find, 'cause I'm always on the grind. But the nighttime, it's the right time.
Hey everybody, we're back with more Live from the Heartland. It was good talking to Gordon Mantler about politics, and now we're going to go to one of Chicago's favorite sons, the one and only Maurice Mobetta Brown. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Good. It's good to have you back on. We had you in the studio a few times in the old days, a few years back. I noticed when I was perusing my emails that there was an announcement that you're going to be at Space up in Evanston, right next to the 49th Ward here, on this coming Thursday, the 25th. And that caught my attention. I said, oh, I want to go to that. And Lynn Orman, our trusty music producer, got a hold of you, and here you are.
That's right.
So tell us a little bit about your growing up. You grew up in Harvey. You're a Chicago guy, even though you went to New Orleans, and now you're splitting your time between LA and New York. Talk a little bit about where you come from, Maurice.
Yeah, well, I'm from Chicago. I was born in Harvey, Illinois, and I went to school at Hillcrest High School, and then I went to college at Columbia College, also at Northern Illinois University, DeKalb. So yeah, I mean, I love Chicago. Chicago has a really special place in my heart. Every time I come home, it's literally coming home because that's where I'm from, and all my family come out and all my friends that I really don't get to see but once or twice a year, you know, because I don't get a chance to do too many shows in Chicago. I'm busy like touring everywhere. But after Katrina, I moved back to Chicago. I moved to the Gold Coast. That was Gertha and Ritchie, so that was cool. But yeah, I really do love Chicago. It's like I love, especially in the summertime, you know, spring and summertime. It's like there's no better place.
What might we expect at this Thursday show up at the Space?
Well, I would say to expect the unexpected with me always. Like I never want to do anything too predictable. That's why I got a very interesting band performing with me at Space. It's kind of a surprise. I could tell you some of the members, but the rest of it is going to be a surprise when you get there.
You want to tell us a little bit about? I'm going back in your history. You did mention Columbia College. I used to teach there. I'm wondering if you ever got to. I don't know if they do any concerts, but you ever back to Columbia ever?
I haven't been back to Columbia in a long time. Usually when I come to Chicago, it's usually to do my annual holiday, Mobetta holiday jam that we do in December. I definitely do that, and then possibly one or two other shows. But this year, I'm excited to be my first time ever performing at Space with my own group. So that's going to be great.
Maurice, you know, I'm wondering a little bit in thinking about your own biography. One of the people that you started to play with was Ramsey Lewis, the late great Ramsey Lewis. And I wondered if you could share a little bit with our listeners and our viewers what it was like working with Ramsey Lewis and what impact you think that experience has had on your life.
Working with Ramsey was a great experience for me. He found me from seeing a news segment with me performing on it from Harry Porterfield, Someone You Should Know, those segments. So he contacted me. Somehow he found my contact and invited me to come to his studio and jam out with him. So I did that, and he was impressed with me and invited me to special guests on this show at it was Orchestra Hall then, Symphony Halls. So I was like, okay, yeah, you know, I did that, and basically the rest was history. After that, we were very, very tight. He would check in on me and offer me different opportunities, and I learned a lot just being around him. And the main thing I learned from Ramsey is that no matter what the music, how difficult the music is, you still gotta have fun. It has to sound like you having fun. He was a master at that.
I'm wondering a little bit about how you, what is your creative process? I mean, if you're going to do a new tune, do you do it while you're with other musicians? You got a little riff going on in your head. How does it come from you into what we get to hear when you play it?
A lot of times I start my creative process with whatever inspires me. I don't really like to sit down and force myself to write, although I can be in writing sessions when it's time to go. I can, you know, pull it together and make it happen. But for me, the most memorable songs that I write happen when I'm just inspired from life. I could be doing something very regular as checking the mailbox or going to the grocery store or something, you know, and then all of a sudden get inspired and hear this melody, this top line, that I'm like, wait, this is something special. And my process usually would be to bust my phone out and record it in my notes, just me singing the idea so I don't forget it. Because a lot of times I think, oh, I won't forget it. It's so good, and I'll forget it later. That's the first step. And then after that, I'll get here in my sacred space, which you can see is my studio. So I have every instrument here to iron out any idea I want to get out. So I'll start there and do like a demo version of the song. And then after I'm happy with it, then I think that it deserves more attention. I'll invite some of my favorite musicians to come through and do their interpretation of the song that I wrote. And next thing you know, I got a hot song.
Let me go back to where you've been living. I've referenced it a couple times and made remarks about you being in New York and LA. You also went to New Orleans though. And I'm wondering, and you were there until Katrina. And what was that experience like for you living in New Orleans? Not only the musical experience, but the lives of people through hardship and distress in many ways. I mean, it's a wonderful town. There's a lot of good times there. There's also a lot of hardship there. So I just wonder if you want to reflect on that, because it's a city close to our heart in a lot of ways. Share it.
Yeah, I mean, my time in New Orleans definitely molded me a lot and influenced me a lot. The one thing about New Orleans is just a very soulful place in general. So like, and so is Chicago. So like coming from Chicago going to New Orleans was a bit of an adjustment, because I feel like in New Orleans everybody's soulful. Like even people that can't possibly play that well, they're just everyone's just soulful, right? The little baby on the street, soulful, tap dancing. And that's like the only difference, like other than just like, and then the people that don't play instruments are soulful. Just everything they do in New Orleans is soulful. So I picked up on that big time going down there, and they embraced me pretty well. I got the Big Easy Award for Contemporary Jazz and the Offbeat All-Star Awards for Contemporary Jazz, and they generally don't let outsiders get those awards, more local awards. So they did a steady at Snug Harbor. That's like their main jazz club every Tuesday. That was great. I was doing my Sold You Out funk gigs at Funky Butt, Tipitina's, and yeah, it was great. I go back to New Orleans every year for Jazz Fest for 2 weeks if I can. I try to block out 2 weeks. Last year I only did 1 week, but every other year it's always been 2 weeks I block out. And I just go down there and do a bunch of shows. I just came back from there, actually, a bunch of sold out shows in New Orleans. It was great.
Maurice, let me ask you, who are some of the people that really have made an impact on your artistic development?
Yeah, well, I think some of the people that really influenced my style of playing and made an impact on my artistic development would be, well, definitely Miles Davis, Jimi Hendrix. I would say.
They're coming now.
Yeah, keep them coming. I mean, it's just so many. Mahalia Jackson.
I saw Mahalia Jackson in Madison Square Garden when I was 13.
Wow, that must have been life-changing.
It was. I was the only. I mean, I was young by myself. I think I was the only white guy in my vicinity. I don't know how I ended up there, but Mahalia Jackson was there. The Swan Silvertones,
Wow.
The Dixie Hummingbirds. It was really great. Anyhow, we're going to run out of time. And so I'd like to twist your arm a little bit. I see you're like ready to go there. You got all this equipment around you. How about a little bit of riff from that, some of your new music on that trumpet of yours?
Oh, okay. How about a little teaser and see how this goes?
That's a nice shirt you got on, too.
I hope to play it on Thursday. Like, it's not even out yet. It's on the new record, so I'm thinking like, should I play it out live? I never played it yet, so I'll be debuting it live like I'm doing right now on the radio. So that's kind of exciting. So I'm gonna see. We're gonna be doing a lot of different kind of music on Thursday. So a lot of funk music, a lot of jazz, just a lot of music to make you feel alive. You know, to feel the spirit of Chicago, the spirit of New Orleans, the spirit of New York. You know, it's gonna be great. I'm looking forward to celebrating life with everyone in spring.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on today. I love this studio. You got guitars back there. You got a soft cushion over your left shoulder.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to come up there on Thursday night and see you in person.
Nice.
You do any rap stuff, as I recall?
Yeah, I do. I'll be doing a little bit of that as well. Thursday, it'd be great. I also got Isaiah Sharkey with me on guitar, so that's gonna be incredible. He's gonna be singing and playing some guitar. And I got James Francis on keys, Blue Note recording artist James Francis. So I'm excited about that. And a few other special guests that I'm not gonna name. It's gonna be a surprise. So when you get there, you'll see.
Okay, Maurice, Mobetta Brown, thanks a lot for coming back to Chicago for this event. Thanks for coming on live from the Heartland. And I'll look forward to seeing you on Thursday night, the 25th, up in Evanston at Space.
Thanks. Yeah, we got 2 sets, so I'll see you soon.
All right, brother. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for
And
having me.
everybody else, we thank you for tuning in to Live from the Heartland for the week of May 20th. And we will be back again next week. We're going to have Koya Paz, the artistic director of Free Street Theater, coming on to talk a little bit about their work in the parks. And I want to thank Lynn Orman, who makes the music portion of this show possible. I want to thank Katie Hogan. I want to thank Gordon Mantler for coming on and talking along with Maurice. And thank you, Tom Clark. Thank you, everybody who makes the show possible, including the engineer, Hal James. And everybody, keep trying to do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
You're doing the best you can. Over the mountain, under the big blue sky, you got a dream awaiting. I can see it in your eye. It may not come easy, but you know you've got a friend. I'll be by your side the entire ride. Just let me hear you say amen. Are you doing? Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing? Are you doing the best you can? Tout donne, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même parce que tu l'aimes? Tu donnes, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même si tu l'aimes? Tu donnes, est-ce que tu donnes le meilleur de toi-même quand tu l'aimes? Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing?